All right, let's go ahead and get started today. I'm counting roughly about 80 people or so in the room, so thanks everybody for coming to this. This is actually one of the kind of like founding talks that I've been doing and delivering now for about the last year or so. A lot of really cool things that I'll be taking us through and exploring techniques, practices, visualizations, design, many things that can go into building a KPI scorecard. I will give a little bit of background about me in a second, but just the standard logistics slides and everything to run through for PASS. So let's kind of get through those and then talk a bit about what we're going to be covering today during this lecture. So, of course, please silence cell phones if you haven't already. I just checked mine and it was not on silent, so good thing to do that if you haven't already. Another thing as well, there's a lot of options for exploring PASS via the newsletters, all the various groups, especially with the local chapters like SQL Saturdays and anything else. I present at those a lot myself, and they're really good resources besides the summit. So many opportunities to just explore a lot of the things that are available as part of the community. Now, a little bit about myself. As I mentioned, and you're kind of seeing implied by just the title of this talk that I'm doing, is I do a lot of visualization design. I've been nicknamed by other MVPs as the VizWiz. It's something that I've ended up leaning further and further on. I've found that many data models are out there that might have good data, and it might be connected to good models, but it falls flat in a lot of ways when it comes to how it's presented. And that's a lot of different things. That's both the aesthetics, how it actually looks. Is it actually appealing to the eye or not? Also how the story is being told, like what kind of visuals are being used. So there's a lot of both art and science that can go into that stuff. This specific talk will kind of get into the idea of scorecards and some of the unique ways you can build that in Power BI. But that is kind of the specialty that I've just presented on and like to share a lot of these ideas back with the community because there's so many fun ways to use Power BI to apply like creativity and to put a bit of an artistic touch on a lot of this stuff. I've been an MVP for 2 years now. I've been in the business as a consultant now for the last 6. And I've just found almost a calling to a lot of these types of things. And overall, I'd say that as much as I enjoy development, presenting like this, I present at the University of Washington. There's a visualizations class that I built there. That's where I've gotten a lot more value from just actually interacting with people, being able to share knowledge where they can go and say, yes, this is actually helping me transform the job that I'm doing, or you've showed me the art of possible with this tool set, so now I know what my limitations are and what features are even available to use as part of like some creative design that this stuff goes. So like I like to be at these kind of events more than anything. It's very rewarding for me. All right, I'll actually skip this one, sorry. So overall, what I want to talk about is the idea of a KPI scorecard within Power BI Desktop. And Power BI is, in many ways, a blank canvas. So there are lots of visualizations available, many ways that you can lay it out, format it, design it. And that can sometimes become confusing and daunting as far as like knowing how do I build something that delivers an effective report to the end users. So I'll be going through a lot of demos today that will instill a lot of various like kind of very clever, cool techniques, layering, visualizations, stuff that's just really creative out-of-the-box solutions that doesn't even require that much customization to be done as far as adding new files in there or new visualizations, but just using what comes with Power BI, but in ways that aren't necessarily as intuitive, but still add a lot of value. So we'll be kind of combining visualizations, a little bit of DAX wizardry as well, and just some innovative techniques to really achieve that. And the foundation for this will be a specific scorecard that I built that has a lot of these universally applicable techniques. So we're going to start from that perspective of almost like a case study that I have that then will broaden it out to conversations on seeing all of these little components and pieces that will allow us to just reapply this in other situations and scenarios. And as time permitting, because this is normally a 60-minute session and I get 75, we have a few extra things that we get to go over at the end. So some additional kind of visualizations and formatting that I want to share with you that are also great things you can put into a scorecard as well. So this is the example of a lot of the techniques that I'll be going over. This is a third version of a scorecard that I built in Power BI. This actually now uses a matrix table and some clever design that you can see up here. Previously, this actually used to be made with a lot of single cards. The problem is that it had many issues with refresh times as far as the rendering, because when you end up with 40 or 50 visuals on a page, it takes a long time to render that in HTML5. But there's many techniques that go into building a very unique shape that this has. And I'll be demoing the actual structure and utility of this in a minute, but from a broad concept, you can see that it contains a mixture of metrics, visualizations, KPIs, things that allow it to quickly and easily read the data from it and have your eyes drawn to important bits of information without also overwhelming it with too much information. White space can definitely be very important as far as that negative space between stuff, so it doesn't appear quite so busy. Try not to breathe too heavily in the mic. All right. Actually, one more slide I wanted to show right there. So, breaking it down into 4 sections. The primary things that we're going to be doing here is actually going into some ideas of leveraging some DAX calculated tables to build that matrix table that we saw. I'm also going to show you a lot of really unique techniques to use with DAX to help with some formatting and especially field values. And then we're going to kind of continue our way through that, starting to add some custom visuals by the third quarter of this presentation, and then some final polish and best practices there at the very end. But this is just that nice broad overview that I was mentioning. Now, I actually want to show you the report in action here. So a couple of things about this that make this very unique. Number one is this is as a typical, not a typical shape for a matrix table. So you normally would not have values per row like this with a separate single calculation per, let's say, cell or tuple that you have in this. So these are actually all individual DAX calculations being provided into this in a custom shape DAX-generated table that allows me to maintain this shape, because this is not something you can build directly out of the box just using the standard pivot and unpivot kind of functions in a matrix table. So I want to walk you through all the techniques that will go into this. But the shape, for one, is one of the unique pieces of this. The fact that I can go within the sales amount value, and I can actually drill in this case, to product category. But these are just placeholders of, let's just consider this test data to show you the capabilities itself of a scorecard and the types of stuff you can build for clients. You start to get those additional grand totals. And let me actually use return percentage, because that will show you the conditional formatting a bit better. But you can drill into this as much as needed and get down to those lower level details, still maintaining this scorecard perspective in here. Another thing that you might be noticing over on the right is I do have some sparklines built in here. This was something that I tried for a long time to build directly in the matrix table, and unfortunately the way it exists today inside of the matrix table in Power BI is okay. Like, you can actually generate SVG sparklines. For anybody who is familiar with my blog on the YouTube channel, you might have seen my post earlier this year where I actually was able to create an image very similar to this directly inside of a matrix table. Unfortunately, a few downsides for this is currently you might notice that the text and all the other values in here are centered. As soon as you add an image in there that gets rendered inside of the matrix table, they become top aligned, so they're no longer in the middle of the row for you anymore. And it also is forcing it to fit within a perspective of a square card. I cannot make a long image in a matrix table to show up. So I've actually built in here separate cards over there on the side with a custom visual for sparklines to include with it, because that was the best solution I could find that looked good and kept the formatting that I wanted to keep. In a perfect world, I would keep it inside of the matrix table and it would work on all the levels, but the best solution I could find, given the aesthetic style that I needed for this specific report, was using it at the top level. And that is actually something you can see that disappears as you actually expand this out. They go away and they become hidden as part of the page itself. So you'll see some ways that you can actually layer the objects on the report page in Power BI to achieve this effect. Even though they're separate entities, it's been built in a way where they maintain this consistency with each other, and it looks like it's a single unit. So even though they're separate pieces, separate visuals, it all has been assembled in a way that maintains that consistency. And then, of course, if you've not used this feature yet, I highly recommend making sure that you turn these things on within Power BI, but you can also have the little tooltips there. So if I can get my mouse to stay put, there we go. It explains exactly what is happening in the visual and allows them just to get some clarity around what the scorecard is presenting to them and how it functions. So just quick 2 raise of hands. How many people in here are actively using Power BI? Most of us in the room. Okay, good. How many people have used report tooltips yet in visual header tooltips in Power BI? A lot less people. It's not something that's actually particularly well placed at the moment. If you didn't read a blog about it, you're probably not going to even know it exists. It's a very buried menu feature. So before I even get into the scorecard, like this is one of my favorite things to come out in the last 3 months. I just want to show you where to turn this on because it's super helpful. And I don't have to layer a custom visual anymore. I don't have to add like little bookmarks with pop-up windows. It's super easy just to have this built into the header. And this can be done per visual. So I will just quickly demo this just as a little technique. So yeah, per any visual that you have, and like I said, it's going to be buried. But if you go to the format settings for that visual, gotta click inside the group. There we go. And it is buried all the way down here. And you have to scroll twice. Notice that when I expanded it, it looked like it ended on the filter icon down here. And then if I kept scrolling, then this other toggle showed up. This has to be turned on for this option to even show up in Power BI. Like right now I have visual header tooltip. That allows me to customize this. I first have to turn this toggle on to see the other menu. So it's, my 2 cents, I don't think it's well placed. The fact that you have to scroll almost twice to even get that little option to show up, because it's almost stuck there at the bottom, it could be better placed. But the feature is amazing, and it's fairly straightforward. Like any other kind of tooltip text or titles and stuff, you just type in the display that you need in there, and that shows up at the top. I won't go too far into the rabbit hole with this one. I will mention that if you are ever needing to include more text than the 250 character limit, which is the limit of the information that you can display in typing in that box, I do have a YouTube video that I will have a link to at the end that shows you a workaround with that with a report tooltip page. But this is something I would encourage you to include in your reports if you're ever building anything out that might be a little bit complex, because it just helps guide the users to knowing what's being displayed, how the functionality is supposed to work, and I found it's been very well received by my clients. Did you have a question?
Do the sparklines sort as well as you change the sorting order in the matrix?
That's a good question. So those do not. So what I often will do as a final result in this, because the question is when I change the sort order here, do the sparklines change? And they do not with that. So as one functionality of this, that was something that I had a conversation with the client on is if you want sparklines and in this shape and format, you will lose the functionality of the sort order. So I actually overlay a clear text box on top of it on the very top. So that way they lose the ability to be able to change the sort order. But really good call out though. Yeah, so with many things, when you customize it to a point where there's a manager or an end user who really wants a very unique scenario, you're going to usually have double-edged swords with a lot of implementations. And there will be a few that I'll point out in here, and some clever solutions that I've found to help fix some of those. But there's always going to be, at some point you'll have to sacrifice one feature for another, and that's the nature of development. All right. But yeah, so you'll see basically how I've created the matrix table with these, but this gives you the broad overview of that. But what I want to go through kind of is component by component or piece by piece and show you how I built this out from a broad level that just gives you ideas of maybe how to start building these yourself within your organization, or just giving you ideas at a minimum. Very squeaky floor. All right. So just to start with, let's have a nice, just broad conversation about like how I actually built this matrix table. I'm going to strip everything out and just address the actual table itself, a mixture of how I got these rows to show up as they did, but also a little bit of the formatting in terms of some of the techniques to get it to have that certain look and feel. So this table itself that you see here is an actual DAX Power Query generated table that I built in here, just with these values on the rows. In this case, it is a disconnected table with one row for each of these words that will actually tie back to DAX in a minute, but I just want to show you the simplicity of this. So the actual table itself was made just using that enter data button. If you've not used this, it makes just a standard table and actually just scripts some JSON code for you. But a very basic table where you enter values, it puts it into your model for you. Can even show that here just very quickly. Wave the magic wand, there you go. And as I said, just the rows for each of the essentially KPIs or metrics that I want to display. So for all the data related to that, for sales amount, return percentage, and a sort order as well. That way it actually displays correctly in there. That's a pretty straightforward thing within Power BI, just sorting text by number. That gives me the organization and the look in this format here. Now, a couple of things that I want to point out about the actual design of this. My biggest thing was I started in a V1 with this, where my client really wanted a grid of single value cards. And I've seen a lot of seen a lot of scorecard reports getting built that way, where it's just tons of tiny visuals pasted everywhere. And for many situations, that's what's required when they want like gauges and all this other stuff. But the more visuals you add, even if you have a model that takes a millisecond to calculate anything with one row in it, you can start adding a lot of time that actually requires to render all of those visuals. So I wanted to figure out a way to recreate a card look in the matrix table, but only needing to use a single visual. So one thing that's actually pretty important about some of the formatting and spacing in here is I've actually set everything to mirror what the snap to grid is in Power BI. So again, kind of raise of hands, who has used or toggled the snap to grid before? Snap to grid, so it's good. Like, not that many people use this. So snap to grid is an object up here that is a toggle switch in Power BI. So what that allows you to do, so let me show you like both ends. So notice that when I'm resizing this, it's pixel by pixel. And there we go, Control Z. If I instead turn on snap objects to grid, there we go. Notice that it's now snapping by a fixed width and height. So for resizing, moving, spacing, any of that, it is always per 8 pixels. So in the cases of this report here, the actual objects over here are snapped at 8 pixels apart, meaning one snap away from each other, and that's how I build almost all of my reports. Just as a development easy button, the easiest way to make sure that your objects are aligned with each other, so they have the same height, same width, and all of that, having this on saves a lot of development time for me. Before they put that into Power BI, it was a lot more annoying to have to resize things per pixel for height and width. This is a very, very fast development mode to turn on when you are using this. And that's what I have recreated in the actual table itself, because I wanted to reproduce the look of a card in here. So a few settings that I'll point out for that, but that kind of gives context of why I had those. And that is a setting you can actually adjust in the matrix table. This is one thing that I could honestly spend 2 hours just talking about the formatting features in the matrix table by itself. It has more options to customize than any other visual built into Power BI. Thankfully, a few years ago, they added that search button if you're ever curious of what might be available, look for fonts, things like that. It can help guide you along. But there is so many ways that you can customize a matrix table, and I've made a lot of unique visualizations, including even heat maps off of them. So there's many, many ways to skin the cat when it comes to this visualization. But that is something that I made sure to kind of set in here, is you can actually add the vertical and horizontal grid thickness to get to that achieved effect where those space between those will now be the equivalent. I can even just toggle that down. It will be the equivalent of any of those snaps. So it maintains that consistency, almost kind of the illusion that they are part of the same entity with those sparklines and this. So it was a nice transition where end user didn't notice any difference, but it allows me to get these nice like big cards per row. A couple of other things that I will just point out just as like personal recommendations to you. In general, I very, very, very rarely ever keep auto size column width on. I will say that given the fact that the canvas is a restricted environment, there are defined borders, and unless you hack it with a resolution, you don't have any more space there. So I'm going to be designing every single visual to fit perfectly within itself. I don't want scroll bars. I think the number one most common thing that I will fix on a first pass over when somebody hires me to make their reports prettier, it's getting rid of a lot of scroll bars because the tables are about 4 pixels too wide and they're stuck with a scroll bar at the bottom. You're going to get that if you have the auto size column width on, because it's going to resize every time the data changes and filters up or down, and it will undo any settings that you have. So it's one of the biggest annoyances that I don't like to use most of the time. So if you are still using it, I would recommend just getting rid of that. That's about the only thing that I really want to mention here. Again, don't want to spend too much time on just the formatting, but this gives you a broad idea of like how much you can customize this before starting to build up some of the other stuff. So I'm going to go ahead now and switch to, there we go. All right. So we've had an understanding of the table, kind of bringing it in. Now I want to talk about like how did I get this grid or this arrangement of values in this order? Because this isn't a column that I can bring in. I don't have a rank column that exists in my data model. I don't have a total value column. These columns were created, or these measures were created, and it's actually a rank measure, total value measure, et cetera, that is returning all of these per row with the different amounts, given the need to have this very unique and specific arrangement. So I actually want to go through as an example and use, if I can find my cursor, there we go, This is kind of going to be our test case where we'll walk through, and I want to show you each of the techniques that I used for some of these DAX measures for these 5 presented here. And with each one, you'll see some techniques on a little bit of formatting, variables, and other stuff that you can actually utilize in DAX. So it'll help you along not only seeing some of the ways you can actually return even non-numerical characters with DAX, but also some ways to use variables and a few other things if you are not doing that already. So let's go ahead and start. There we go. With number 1, open this up here. Got all my little DAX measures that I want to talk about right there. And if anybody on the product team for Microsoft's in here, I don't know if they are, if I had a way to make this either like half size, I would love to be able to resize this to something that is not either 1 bar or the entire page. I've been waiting for that for a while. It's not happened yet. But let's just discuss this a little bit. Here we go. I can try to let's see if I can get them. There we go. Okay, that's good enough. So what we have here is a rank function that I'm using. And this actually is a perfect opportunity. I have about 5 items that I'm going to be handing out. So there'll be a few times where I'm asking a question on some of the reasons why I'm doing certain things. And if we get those answers right, I have a Power BI bottle opener, a Microsoft Azure USB hub, and a battery pack. So just as an FYI. But can anybody tell me, for a rank function, just to do a quick DAX quiz in here, why isn't all function necessary in there? Pretty much anytime you ever do a rank function, you need to use the all function.
Because you want the rank within all of it, not just one of it.
Exactly. So I'll even give some context for this. Might even help to look at this. So if I was to try to rank anything on this page right now, there's a filter for store. So it would rank against itself. There would be no way for it to expand the universe and actually rank against all other stores. So anytime you are ever writing a rank function, you will be needing near guaranteed to use an all function in that. So that's one of the reasons that is included in there. Let me get back to my right page. There we go. But yeah, this is a pretty straightforward one. We'll start with the simple, kind of work our way out. But all I'm doing is I'm returning the rank of this store for that specific metric against the rest of these. I want to preface this conversation as well with the idea being that this is something where, because of how customized this report needs to be, I did need to write each of these individual measures. And that was something that I discussed with the client and they wanted to be able to do. But the more you customize, it's just natural that you will need to provide more development against it. So I am reviewing just 1 row with you of this one, but the same things were basically made for all the other rows. But we're just going to look at 1 measure of each type in here. And then the nice thing with DAX, if you haven't tried it yet, is you can actually do concatenations of values. And in this case, I'm basically just taking what its actual rank is, looking at the, putting it in there with the text for of, comparing it with the all store count there at the end to get more of a user-friendly readout here. And the nice thing is it also shows a comparison in there. So it's not just 76, it also is against a total number, which can change over time. So that 299, if they add a store tomorrow, will change to 300. But it's just a bit more user-friendly to read within that. Total value itself is the one that I'm actually going to skip because that's just a fairly straightforward one. But right here, now we're going to start getting into some other things as well. So we have Power BI users in here. People who's used an X function in this room? Not as many. Okay, so a lot of people have written or used Power BI, but not many people have written an X function. Can anybody tell me what X functions are? It's like the family. What are they supposed to do?
They iterate over the table for specific calculations.
Yeah, exactly. They are iterator functions that iterate over whatever row context you provide it. By default, if you just tell it to iterate over a table, it iterates over every row in that table. But you can also have it iterate over different levels. So you can basically roll up data, you can group it, and then do a calculation over top of that. So in this case, what am I iterating over? Thing on the right, so month and year. So all I'm right now calculating, just from a broad perspective, is I want to be able to grab the monthly average. And to get that, I need to average a value per month. I can't average all 31 or anything that gets lower or higher. I want to be able to have a distinct list per month of 1 row for January, February, etc. So that is what I'm actually specifying in the average X inside of the table option that it has here. right there. That allows me to basically create a distinct list, because values is returning a distinct list of items of this column. And now I'm going to have one row per month and year, and then whatever that value is, which in this case is the actual variance to return, which is that percentage right there. And then it's just going to average all of this. If I have 25 months, it will return the average of all of those 25. And I can do a sum, a min, a max. But the logic behind almost all of the X functions is identical. What is the row context or table, essentially, that I am iterating over? And then what is the value that is going to be part of the iteration? But if you haven't used them yet, like, that is the #1 thing that will start to upgrade your use of DAX. Like, it was something that I didn't use probably until further into my career that I would like to admit, but there are things that are extremely powerful and an absolute necessity for some scenarios when you have to change the level at something that calculates. Because sometimes you can't average or min or max at a lower level. It has to be first pre-calculated to essentially a subtotal, and then that is the thing that you actually iterate over. So I would encourage you to definitely look into these as just a way to upgrade. All right. So we got that one here. We got the monthly average. And then the last one as well, which will now introduce a third thing that will also really help with development, which is variables. And I'll probably continually see not that many hands. So we have a room of people who work with Power BI, less people who have worked with X functions. How many people have worked with variables? More people who worked with variables than X functions. Okay, I thought they would have been about the same. Interesting. Yeah, variables are amazing. Came out in Excel with Excel 2016 or so, and it's in many ways it helps to make things more readable. It essentially acts as a temp table when you're writing DAX measures, so it caches the data. You'll see in one of the further measures that kind of aspect of it. In this case, what I've done is I've used it to clean up my actual calculation, because otherwise it would be a little bit too long. I'll actually keep it. Yeah, let's keep it about right here, and then I will zoom in there. Perfect. All right. Yeah, so let's break this down a little bit. So what I'm doing is, again, there's that variance to return. In this case, it doesn't really matter the values. These are more of just the practices and principles that I'm wanting to discuss. But what I'm having it do is I want to grab whatever that number is just for the very latest month. And in theory, I could have had this here. I could have referenced this entire thing, and I could have kept that in just one formula. But the problem now is my formula that's this long is now going to become this much longer. And it's in those cases, to me, that becomes harder to read. So just from just a readability perspective, variables are great because it can take this complicated calculation that maybe I don't need anywhere else and I just want in this measure. I declare it at the top, give it a short, friendly name, and now it becomes much easier to read where month and year just equals the max month. So I can look at that and probably in 1 second now understand what this calculation is doing versus maybe 3 or 4 seconds to have to kind of read through the rest of it. So even if it's not actually helping with performance at all, it does make things a lot more readable. So kind of reason #1 to consider using variables more often in your values. Go ahead and exit out of that. There you go. And you'll see some other ones in here as we are kind of now trekking through the data that we have in front of us. We've gotten to the monthly average, we've gotten to the latest month. Something that DAX can do as well is it actually can return a lot of different symbols. There's now kind of a second way to return things that you see here using the new icon sets. I still actually prefer to rely on DAX a bit because that can be reused a lot more readily in visualizations over and over again, where each time you set up icons in a new visual, you have to actually go in and configure them repeatedly. So that I find is adds a bit more development time. But DAX can return a lot of different things, including the top 2 symbols, which is unitchar. That's actually a really nice way to add little KPIs in either its own visual. You can add it next to it, as we'll see a little bit later. But there's many, many ways to return some kind of an indicator rather than an actual number itself. And that's represented in here. And even more readable now, lots of variables declared, and actually a couple new techniques that I want to point out in here. So you'll see at the top, I have declared 3 different variables, up, middle, and down. So standard KPI, up, and neutral, and kind of a negative value. This case, I'm just declaring the variable that I want to look at, which is the one previous metric that I just walked through. And then just a nice, clean switch and true statement down here at the bottom. And I've already talked about the fact that variables can increase readability. Number 2 is performance. So right here is exactly what I wanted to one sec. There we go. My mouse sometimes goes over onto the wrong screen. Here we go. Perfect. There we go. Now I can draw. All right. So this is being declared 3 times, or this is being called upon 3 times in this section. And the reason I'm putting the variable there rather than this is if I was to put the measure in here, it would actually start decreasing performance, because even though a first condition is met in DAX, behind the scenes, it actually will do things where it sometimes will calculate the remaining values if you have a lot of switch statements. So if statements and switch statements are one of the fastest ways to kill performance in DAX. And the solution to at least alleviating that is making sure that you've, whatever is getting continuously called upon is declared as a variable. So it basically caches that, it stores it, and now you can reference as many times as you need, but it's not going to recalculate it over and over again. It's just going to call upon the stored data that it has for that in RAM and basically do a comparison of it. There's a few scenarios where this doesn't work. Like if you declare a variable, then you can't calculate and do a bunch of other stuff on top of it sometimes, but those are more like niche scenarios. But for performance, this can drastically increase the speed of a measure. I would say this is probably the second most common thing that I do on initial cleanups in customer files is after I fix the scroll bars that are usually rampant everywhere, I look in and I find if statements everywhere and switch statements, and nobody's touched a variable yet. They have kept those out, and they're wondering, well, yeah, why does this take like 7 seconds for this table to load? There's only one value. Well, yeah, you have a switch statement referencing an if statement that's referencing another if statement, so you've nested this ugly thing, and it's extremely slow. But the end result for us is we have, basically just it looks at the selection statement. It has 3 single things that it's determining. Is it above 0? Is it equal to 0? Or is it below? And then it's going to return one of those 3 symbols there just to represent the general trend that's going for it. Not doing anything with color yet, but just indicating this. Another thing that I do want to point out is the last kind of conversation on these. Got to get my cursor to show back up. Question?
How did you type in those up and arrows?
That's a great question. So the question is, how did I type in these things? So many ways you can do it. If you go to Word and you have the symbol list, you could put that into the Word doc, copy and paste it into here. I'm sure there's somebody who has a hotkey that knows how to access that ASCII symbol. In this case, these are ASCII. But yeah, any symbol that shows up in Word can be pasted into here. And just make sure it's in quotes because it's considered to be text. And these, by the way, can be formatted. Notice that is returning the green color, because since it's an ASCII text character, any color formatting will apply to it. These unitchar symbols are rich and actually have color and formatting, so those do not change color. I want to show you the code for this in a second. I will mention one dark side to these, though, is depending on the browser or the operating system, these will change. So I have like the Mac whatever chart up arrow symbol looks a little bit different. It's still going up, but if the client expects it to look one way, it will look a bit different because they just have a different catalog for them. And then sometimes on mobile, I've found a few unitchar symbols don't actually show up. All you have is just an empty box that shows there, but it's basically it looks like it's not found. So that's the one caveat. ASCII always renders exactly as it looks, but the other ones have some variations depending on the system it's being loaded on. But let me show you just the other one, just here as a final example. KPI. I love the search feature. There we are. So this is actually a better version of how I used to write them. But again, very similar concept. I have my chart increase, my chart decrease symbol. I actually used to write these out, and I'll mention just the fact that I love it when I can actually do a presentation and somebody teaches me something new. I'm very much open to learning. And somebody I saw just looked they were concentrated on their computer, and they raised their hand and said, oh yeah, you can paste a unitchar symbol directly in here. I previously used to do this. It used to be unitchar, and then you'd have to go online to a unitchar database, and you'd look up the number, and that would represent it. But the problem is, if I'm looking at this measure in 6 months, unless it's on a visual, I'm not going to remember what 8,425 was. I have to go copy that, put it back online. And I was doing a demo where it just had the unitchar function there twice, and somebody just raised their hand, and you can just paste the symbol in there. I had a mind-blowing moment from that, because I've been doing this for 2 years. Wait, you can just directly paste that into the DAX code? That's awesome. And it's so much easier to read. So yeah, both ASCII symbols and Unichar, even emojis. Like if you grab the the cry face or the happy face or the poop emoji, you can just paste that right into there. For S&G, I will actually occasionally do like trainings where I want to ask them like, what's the most ridiculous emoji we can use, and we just put one of those in there to like indicate bad data. But yeah, the entire list of emojis available on your phone can be used in Power BI in full color. All right. Any questions at least on the conversation around variables before I switch gears a little bit? Yes, question.
What's the value of using variables to represent those images?
And here it's, again, like it's the reusability of it. It also, to me, just makes it easier to read at the bottom. I still like to have the actual word versus the symbol. I could paste them down there. I don't think the performance is going to change at all for that because it's just calling upon a symbol. But I generally just like to have my list of variables at the top and just the names of them as like very clean text at the bottom. So it makes it much more easy to read the logic rather than maybe just a bunch of symbols that are in there. Yeah. So, and that's the thing with variables. It's a mixture of like the art, which is readability, and then in the case of the selection trend, that is a performance increase. Because otherwise, if I actually just had this here, now it's going to be slower. It's now having to run it twice. But the other ones, it's a personal preference. Like honestly, if I saw this down here instead of those and you didn't declare it, I probably wouldn't even edit it. It's not going to change the performance much. That's more of just a personal preference. I err on the side of variables and just declaring everything at the top. All right, last thing that I wanted to show, and actually the one that I was demoing originally, and this is a very important piece that I think it was Marco Russo that maybe taught me this one. Let me go back to it. Yes. So this is a very important component of using variables when writing DAX. The reason that I have this here, because I'm not just running my actual logic after the return as the actual measure itself. I'm declaring the actual calculation I want as a variable called result. Why do you think I'm doing this?
That way you can test different parts of it. And put
Yep.
whatever arrow down or selection last under the return.
Yep.
And it'll return that part of whatever you're doing so you can have calculations.
What was your name, by the way?
Andre?
Andre. Yeah, so Andre hit it on the head. So the reason is I can test any variable that I want really easily. So if I remember let's just say I have a temp table or just a table on the page and I'm trying to test out to see if this works. Oh wait, the final number seems wrong. Well, now I don't have to come up and like comment out everything and add a bunch of, of comment sections to rewrite it. I can just come down here. Let's say I wanted to test arrow down. I do that. It instantly returns the arrow down function. If I wanted to test selection latest, there we go. Yeah, I can do that. So it very, very quickly allows me to swap through any variable that I have. So that's also another reason it's really nice to, even if it's not for performance reasons, every little thing that you can declare as a variable makes it that much easier to test if anything ever breaks. I think it was one of the SQL BI blog things that mentioned this, maybe another presentation, but as soon as I saw that, I was just, hadn't thought of that, but man, yeah, that makes my life a lot easier as a developer if I'm testing anything that's not working correctly. So my recommendation to you with anything that is more than a few steps, variable result, return result, save you a lot of time for testing. All right, where are we at for time there? No, perfect. Okay. A couple things left now that we've had a conversation around those. We've seen at a broad perspective, so a little bit of DAX, some techniques, overall just general practices that I like to pass along as we're working through this, some creative ways we can actually use DAX to produce interesting results like this. The next thing that I want to actually now review with all of us is the idea behind, like, how did I get this to show up in the form that it is? Like, how did I get each row to be populate in this perspective? So that's actually going to be starting with just the idea that I currently have a calculation that is just selected value that basically just grabs the value from a column if there is only one value being returned. It's similar to like a first round blank and a few others. I like it because it's a little easier to read than some of the others, plus provides an alternative. Won't go too much into it, but if you ever need to grab the value per row when there's one value being returned, this is a really good, clean way to write versus an if has one value, then max of something else, which is a bit more complicated. The term that I like that I've learned to use, and again going to SQL BI, who are like the masters of SQL, or the masters of DAX, is this is called syntax sugar. It's doing the same in the back end for the most part, what you might have written with a longer statement, but it just makes it smaller and cleaner. So you'll see the context of why I have something called scorecard metric name here in a minute. So let's look at the next formula after this. There we go. All right. Some good reasons that I actually have quite a few different things in here. But again, that variable is being declared at the top because my metric name is being called upon, what is that, 9 different times. I don't want it to have to calculate 9 different times. But it is looking for the metric name per row in this little visual that I have, and depending on what row it's on, if it is identifying that this is the sales amount row, then it's actually going to return the actual amount. It's going to return the amount all the way down through that list. Now, you might notice, though, the fact that I have each one written in a format. And that's actually a really good reason, because if you take a closer look at this table, you'll notice that my one column per column has multiple different formats in it. I can do a dollar value, I can do a percentage. So I'm actually now free to be able to customize every single cell with this and be able to display that, again, in this completely custom grid that otherwise could not be built just natively in Power BI. So there's some setup involved to go into this, but this gives me near full autonomy to put whatever I want in each of these coordinates. Now, this is actually a good question for the group, and I'll throw out the USB hub. So what happens to the value when I format it? What data type does it become? It's a string, yeah. So it's no longer an actual numerical or date value anymore. I think that was, let's see if I can get this not hitting heads. Nope. Yeah. Yeah, no problem. But yeah, so like that's one thing to at least consider. In this case, this thing is so custom that this is the final output of it. But consider this, again, a double-edged sword. You don't want to reference this calculation with anything else because you no longer can do divides or greater thans or less thans. So this is the end of the road for this calculation. It is now a string. The only goal it has is to just display the data in a way that looks like a number or looks like a percentage. But it should not continue the journey anywhere else in the model because it's basically this is the final output for it. So just consider that with a format function. It can provide any formatting for dates, numbers, etc., but it will convert it to a string when you do that. So just kind of as just a footnote there. But yeah, like that allows me to grab all these, and per row, I create this column, measure column, that will return all these different values and then put them in whatever specific format I need, giving me that very unique shape. And then last one in here, this one will actually be pretty important. Just again, looking back at our data, you'll notice that some of the values in here also contain this conditional formatting. In this case, the reds, the greens. Let's see if I expand this out. I can get some other colors in there. Here we go. 3 different colors being provided. Basically a traffic light in there. Granted, these are the standard colors. I know that there are some cases where more accessible colors are needed and getting rid of some of these, but I'm just sticking with the traditional ones for this talk. But let me show you how I was able to create that. Very similar process to just the standard value column, but I actually used, there we go. There we go, perfect. Got it. So again, having fun with declaring variables makes it much easier to read by the time you get to the bottom. But the nice thing too is you can actually, inside of a switch, you can layer other switches if you need to. Granted, like it's not going to be the fastest thing in the world, but when you have scenarios where you need to provide certain formatting, this is essentially the solution that you can create if you are going to leverage the logic in DAX. You can also set up similar logic like this just directly in the conditional formatting option with rules and other stuff. But I actually really, really like to put my hex codes in my measures because then I can reuse it over and over again. This is a more complex one, but at a simplistic level, if I have 5 different colors that I want to return, depending on if a number is this, one color, this, another color, etc., and I have 18 visuals that I want to apply that logic to, I don't want to have to come in to my visual. Let's see if I can, and there's that sorting again. I don't want to have to come into here and go here, and then for 18 visuals, do this. That's a lot. There's half an hour of my time just setting up the same logic 18 times. I would like to rinse and reuse my logic whenever I can. So I'll ask the question to the group. I would figure if, we'll just first raise of hands, who has done conditional formatting in Power BI? Most people, okay. We have color scale and rules, how many people have ever used field value formatting in Power BI? We got like 3. Okay, this is great. I didn't use it that much either. It's one of those that, like, well, rules work. Maybe like tomorrow I'll look at field value. Or maybe like the next day. And it was one of those cans that I just kept kicking down the road because technically my development wasn't broken. I have a long list of things that I want to explore, and most of the time I don't prioritize learning new stuff. I did not click that learn more button. But after a while, after this was first released, I explored it, and what field value means, and let me actually show you the output of this here. There we go. Which one? Total. One sec. On one of these. Let's try this one. Font color. Well, I'll just go to that and then do this. Let me put it in here for you, and then I'll talk about it. There we go. Okay. Perfect. So that would be the output of what happens when you do field value formatting, meaning none of the logic is now kept in here. All of the logic is being done in the measure itself. So the only thing I would now have to do if I set up the logic for coloring in a single measure, 18 visuals, field formatting, select the measure. Field formatting, select the measure. That much quicker. And I only had to set up the calculations once. And I gave you an example when I maybe had 5 colors to go from. God forbid you have like 20 or 30 colors that you need to like switch between, and then you have 20 visuals to do that on. Now you start getting a compounding snowball nightmare scenario where you have to do this over and over and over again. So field value basically takes all the color logic that you would do, keeps it in DAX, and that's exactly what is happening right here. And it gives us more perspective to walk through this. Again, I am declaring the colors at the top. I could just put the hex code in there, but again, that's like a unichar number to me. I'm not going to remember that C0504D. Oh yeah, that's totally red. Like I don't keep those set of information in my brain. But red, yellow, and green declared at the top, and then all of the logic's happening here at the bottom. Again, it follows a very similar pattern to the rest of them, with the exception being is that in this case, I actually had 3 different colors I wanted to return. So for the conditions within the return amount percentage, that's the one scenario where red, yellow, or green can be returned, just depending on the business logic there. And the rest of them is just red or green, like either positive or negative. So I didn't need the extra information in there. But even at this level, yeah, it takes you a second, but it's still relatively readable if you just walk your way through it, and you can see very clearly, yeah, if this happens, red is returned, otherwise green. So all of that logic is in here. The only things that are ever exported from this are the actual hex codes, and then that's automatically passed through to the tables that call upon it for whatever value you're wanting to do conditional formatting on, which is how we're getting these greens, these reds, and then in this case, go back to sorting that again. Come on, there we go. And then the yellows and everything else in there. So it's automatically applying those just for the rows that I want when I'm actually looking at deltas as far as good and negative. But really, like, if you were to take one big takeaway from this, besides the variables and everything with the DAX, that field formatting is really, really powerful. It's something that I will, at the end of this, you'll have a link to my site. It's one of the YouTube videos that I've done, but it's a great way to reuse your work. And avoid falling into the well of having to just customize every single visual with all of those rules. I now completely avoid those, now knowing that field formatting exists. All right. Before I go to continue the conversation, start talking about the sparklines, are there any questions about the conditional formatting logic or anything?
Is there any way to set variables at the report level so you have to create that color scheme?
I would love it if that was the case. Currently, it is not. There's definitely some good development reasons for that, but unlike in SQL, where you can set a temp table that can be accessed by anything, there's no way within to declare a variable in one measure that can be then linked to another one. And there's some performance and other stuff that I don't want to get into, for the reasoning of that, because otherwise it has to almost keep it in RAM for everything and every calculation, and that can actually start to cause a lot of problems. It's been requested, but my understanding is there's pretty good reasons why it's not very feasible to do that. So it's only per calculation itself. Good question. Any others? Yes?
So defining your development variable, do that throughout the whole Power BI, is there any
No, actually, so the question is using, declaring one more variable in result, it's still running the exact same calculation. So taking that calculation and running it after return or before, when I've tested it in DAX Studio, like nothing. Like it's the, what is it, if it's 15 milliseconds or less, as Marco Russo and Alberto Ferrari describe it, it's noise. It doesn't actually have an impact. And like that's been on my observations. And I would even just second that they're the ones who recommend it. And I basically take anything they say as just like spoken word. Like I have not seen them publicly write or do anything that, and it might be wrong, but I've personally never seen anything that they later retracted and saying like this was incorrect. The closest they've come to it is, well, we said this method before, well, now here's a better method. They usually just improve upon it, but they've never been like explicitly wrong on anything. They are the gods of that.
So I would say that the only problem that you can find is that if you are, for example, defining a date as a string, and you are in Euro,
Oh, yep.
it will change.
Correct, yeah, and so the call out is like, and I'll just broaden it to dates. U.S. versus European dates, always a headache because I'm very on board with date, month, and year. That's a logical order. From a system perspective, like the actual way that the numbers are counted, I totally see from the code why the other format can work for engineers, but complications always happen for that, and conversions and everything else. So yes, it's one thing to consider. It's goes to kind of the consultant answer if it depends, but yeah, it absolutely just making sure to think about how it needs to be formatted for that person, because the format will stick it to the US one if you actually do DD, et cetera, and all that. So it won't dynamically change anymore, which otherwise it would. Good call out. All right. So last thing that I want to kind of show here as part of this thing before I show you some other techniques is the way that I got the sparklines into this. So let me get my scroll bar just like randomly pops up. There we go. Good. And there we go. Yeah. All right. So you might notice the fact that this table here. I think I need to do that. There we go. Okay. A little less breathing on there. The matrix table has been built out to actually cover the sparklines. That's thing number one that I did. So one thing that I would recommend is building Power BI in general is take full advantage of the fact that opacity is your friend. You can do a lot of very clever tricks with layering when you realize that the elements can actually be intentionally stacked on top of each other. The first probably 3 months or so of using Power BI, I was kind of the mindset where like nothing should touch. Everybody has its own space. Keep them separate, like no overlap. Like that's a bad thing to do. And you don't want to cause any like issues with that. And I started to realize that like you can actually utilize the transparency for a lot of certain things. In this case, I'm going to just take the scroll bar and let me make sure my snap to grid is off. I don't want it to jerk around at all. The actual table stops right there. So it extends out to here for a reason. Because if I stopped it here and I expanded, well, it's not going to fill it up. But the reason I have it expanded all the way out is that's how it hides my sparkline. Because as I mentioned, my sparkline only works at the total level. We also make sure that they can't sort it because we don't want it to change order. But it's out here because that invisible or that transparency that's there, it looks like the sparklines are there. They are represented next to those rows. But then you expand it out, it fills in to the rest of the frame that's sitting there essentially invisible, and then it hides the rest of that stuff. So using things like that, layering, by the time it's published, the experience is seamless for them, as close as it can be at least, but it still achieves the effect of hiding those automatically. I'm not actually making it invisible. I didn't toggle the visibility in the selection pane, but it basically covers it up and finishes the illusion of getting rid of it now as I start to drill down into lower levels. Now, once I did that, though, there was still an issue. So can anybody think of a way that those still might appear even when I'm drilled down into a lower level? There's something I can click that can cause an issue right now. Da-da-da-da. There we go. So unfortunately, there's no way to disable this in the matrix table. This is just the visual filtering between. Like if I selected this and I had a bunch of other stuff, the typical action would be is all of my other visuals would now filter to category cameras and camcorders, I believe. And it also not only grays out the other rows, I unfortunately found out, it also turns the opacity for them on. So it's kind of revealing the background, and I tried to look for every setting in the matrix table. Like, there's got to be a way to adjust how this filter look appears, or at least turn off the opacity. Keep them gray, but somehow just stop making it partially opaque, and I found nothing to do that. However, if we actually look at my main report, all sorts of little clever techniques, and this will teach you to use a visual to act as kind of a cover. So I'm going to open this up. Did I go in the wrong order? Let's try page 4. There we go. And I think, one quick sec. There we go. Put this up here. Okay, open that up. There we go. So it's not perfect. You still see it for like a second. There we go. And right now my computer is also doing a bunch of stuff, so it's a little slower. But once it's published, it normally hangs there for about a quarter of a second, and then it goes away. So it temporarily shows it, but by the time it's finished rendering, essentially, that issue goes away. So what do you think I might be doing to actually help get rid of that background? Like, what logic do you think I'm incorporating?
You're reducing the opacity of the sparkline.
I'm definitely doing something with coloring. So let's, and there was another, I think, idea maybe. Yeah.
Reordering the layout order so it goes to the background.
Both of those would be great. Also, if there was actually a way to somehow, through a filter, toggle a bookmark, I could solve this really easily, because then I would make a filter and it could toggle selection. But nothing is happening in the selection pane. So no reordering is happening, no visibility is being toggled. However, I am very cleverly using a tree map visual behind it. Tree maps are great to actually provide a box that can just fill in color. So let me show you exactly what is in here. I'm going to go ahead and turn off a few things. There we go. By the way, if you've not used groups in Power BI, I would highly recommend it. Notice the fact that all of my actual elements in here, there's a lot more of them. However, they are grouped into sections. Very easy. It's one of those things where you are in the selection pane and you have multiple objects, like in PowerPoint and a lot of other stuff. Group is an awesome way to do organization. But I'm going to go ahead and take a few things out of here, because I want to show you it by itself first, and then you're going to actually see exactly what I'm doing, or like what's being accomplished in there. Sparkline cover, that's what I want. All right, so I'm going to take you, come on, copy, come on, and paste you right there. So, big, empty, blank box. However, the thing that I was doing, I was applying a filter to either the category or the subcategory, any of those product levels. Anytime a filter was happening, it was causing this to do something. So let me just quickly put up category. Right there, I'll just add that as like a slicer. So let's watch this in action. Glitchy, there you go. See that? Every time I make a selection, it's turning color. The color, in fact, is the same color as my background. So what this is this is a full page sparkline cover. The only thing it is the tree map with no groups, no details, just a single value in the value section. With nothing to categorize it or break it down, and no title or anything, it basically just fills the entire visual with a single color. In this case, I've just applied the color of the background in, where was it? Category? Yeah. So the color's in there, and the logic for the DAX is pretty straightforward. Let me go ahead and show this to you. Like I said, there's sometimes when you're put into a corner and you're in a box and you only have a limited set of tools, you find creative ways to use the tools you are given. So switch true statement in there, and it's simply checking to see, is product category filtered? Return a value of 1. If the subcategory is filtered, meaning like it's the equivalent of me selecting a row from that scorecard table, return 1. Otherwise, 0. And if it's 0, and if there's no values, then this object is completely blank. It doesn't return anything because there's nothing to fill it in. And it just returns the 1, fills up the entire section, and it's basically acting as a visibility toggle that is covering up the object. So that is how it is doing it on this page. Come on. There we go. So this will help when you see the sort order and why I've grouped things. Notice that in here, my actual scorecard matrix, if I can zoom in a bit more, the table itself is on the top. In between the table and all of my sparklines is that cover. So it's kind of sandwiched between both of them, completely invisible. So right now it is actively covering this entire section right here, but because no selection has been made, it's just an invisible item sitting on the page. And then it takes a second or so for it to, run the DAX calculation and re-render that image, which is how, if I open this up and click here, there you go. See, like, it just hiccuped for half a second and you barely saw it, but by the time that tree map renders, it is now a non-transparent object between the two of them. So there's some very clever ways you can kind of help to hide some of the cobwebs behind there. And again, it's not a perfect solution. It is the best that I was able to implement given the sometimes frustrating set of requirements for this. But creating a custom scorecard like this can be achieved in a lot of methods, and you're also just learning very clever ways to use items. I will actually say that I probably use the tree map more for this scenario, meaning covering objects, than I ever actually deploy this as a visual. The tree map, donut, and pie chart are my 3 least used. I think they look great on covers of books and on a hotel lobby presentation screen, but I find that the tree map's just extremely hard to read versus other visuals. I have another talk that talks entirely about demystifying visuals and chart design. It's just one that it looks cool when you can see the cascading series of boxes going away, but when you actually ask a customer to compare one box versus the other, or ask them what the 5th largest was, it takes them 10 to 15 seconds to find it versus a bar or a column chart, which is so much quicker to look at. So I'm glad I finally found a practical purpose for the tree map. Right, yeah. It's nice. Like, it's not completely useless for me now. It serves a function. What are we at for time? 3:02, so 15. Okay, good. All right. I think one or two other things that I want to point out. I'm going to short circuit one conversation, at least given the length of time that I have. I'll occasionally just go ahead and also do the stuff created on the left. But I'll just briefly mention the remaining things wrapped around here as far as the formatting, because I do actually want to show you one visualization that I was given permission to actually present, who was created by Mike Carlo, that I want to show at the end of this session here. But overall, the 2 things that I would just recommend is kind of like formatting and aesthetic design. I actually really do like if I can actually select it, these things. Where is it? There it is. Any of the boxes that can be created from the shapes there, it's a nice way to just provide a frame to the report itself. So I've actually been implementing those more and more over the years, where it frames it around. And then as you can see at the bottom, I didn't really like the white space originally there, so I ended up implementing that little piece down at the bottom. It's just a text box that I filled in with a bit of coloring, and it's the difference between, you can see here, I feel like I always hide my taskbar and it never stays away when I want it to. There we go. But yeah, so I don't find that it is quite as polished, and just putting little extra things here or there around it, just to keep the continuity. It would be a great way to describe it. But yeah, just a little bit of extra polish really can go a long way, just creating that nice output. Yeah, and like I said, there's a few other things that I can mention on this, but I'm very excited to want to show you guys this new visual today that some of you might have seen. It's weird. I feel like Power BI just glitched out right there. Maybe. I'm just gonna ignore that. I'm sweeping that under the rug. All right.
Welcome to demos.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So this is something that, again, I want to give a nod out to Mike Carlo at PowerBI.tips. This was actually his invention that I saw at another demo years back, and I've been 6 months ago, but I've been waiting for him to do a blog on this, and he hasn't gotten there yet, but I think it's a really, really clever way of layering visuals. I wish I had thought of this one. I have a bunch of others, but let me show you how it operates. This is a great thing to add to scorecards, by the way. So there's a gauge that fills up in the back end and in the actual donut chart itself. So it's a few different visuals that are in there to create this cool donut gauge effect. Like I said, I typically avoid donuts, but this is actually one that I think has enough layers in it that it's really cool, on a primary dashboard or executive report. But it's can anybody guess how many visuals are in this? There are 3. What are the 3 visuals? One is an obvious question. Okay, there's a bar chart, yeah. The very back end is just what kind of bar chart? Ooh. What was the answer? Yeah, so like a stacked percentage bar chart is the one that's in the back. And then what's the third visual? Single value card, all three of those. So yeah, they are all layered together in here to create that. So let me see if I can dissect this a bit, ungroup it. We got 1, we got 2, we got 3, and then in this case I have a background filler to go into just to cover up the background in there. Because I can't actually do this on this one. Why can I not turn on the background for this? What would happen if I actually turned all white background on the donut chart? Cover up the rest of them. That's a very common thing that I do, especially because I like to have light gray backgrounds typically. So to basically achieve this, it was just a standard text box or a button. Honestly, they do the exact same thing, whether or not you just do a blank button, fill it in, or a text box. Those essentially achieve the exact same effect of providing a framework with the color in it. But layering those together achieves this nice little effect in here. And actually, one thing that he's not done that I added into this, since we've had a deluge of conditional formatting features coming out to Power BI in the last 6 months, is the colors that you are seeing changing here. So notice that based on certain values, I can actually change this from red. Now it's getting yellow. So like as it's approaching the goal, these values can actually change. So that's something that's been available in Power BI for single value cards. Again, I have a YouTube video on this, but it walks you through the fact that for a single value card, you can now change the background, the font, the title, basically anything that you can color normally, you can actually put a field value in there like we saw with DAX, and you can dynamically color it. So you can add a lot of like color KPI logic to this stuff. In this case, that's what I wanted to represent here. I'm still noodling on trying to figure out how to fill the background color in there, because it's technically 2 measures stacked on top of each other, and that doesn't allow you to apply field formatting to it. So like that's my next step, is like how do I actually change the fill of the background and keep like the text black, because that's my next big goal for this. But I think it's an incredibly useful way to just to add like something that gives you a lot more value than just the donut itself, and executives like this a lot. So we are at 08, so this is a perfect time to start some closing conversations. But just from a general perspective, is there any questions on this one? Again, if you're curious of the site of the person who built this, very easy. powerbi.tips. They do a lot of visualization like myself, and we collaborate on like videos and other stuff occasionally, and reports, but this is Mike Carlo's creation. You had a question? Oh, then. Like, it's funny because that's one of the ones I didn't have time to do. Like one of those? Yeah, so that's, this is, I don't have time to actually demo it. I will be doing a video here in a couple of weeks on this, but given adjusting the width and a few other settings in the formatting setting and turning off the axes, you can create a progress bar like this just with a stack column chart. All you need is, something on Legend to break it up, in percentage, and shape and format it, and these are very achievable. But I do know a lot of people don't want a donut chart, they want a progress bar like this, and you can have vertical or horizontal. That fits pretty nicely on the page. That would have probably been the second thing I demoed if I had a little bit more time. But like I said, don't worry, I thought this up last night, and then it will now actually be a video of mine in about 3 weeks. But I want to put up a couple links as I also field some other questions. So overall, let's go ahead and stick you down here. There you go. And let's see if I can, last time it took too long to set it up, so I'm just going to do this. Here we go. So just a brief outline of myself. Again, what I do is both at the PASS site, the presentation PDF is available. I separately keep a log of all of my presentation PDFs up here. The QR code is too small. I will have a larger one up in a minute. My consulting services and files and templates links are available there. I also provide to every event that I do a coupon code that just gets 30% off any of the reports and files that I make or consulting services that last for 1 month. My YouTube channel does have a video that goes up every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 5 to 10 minute videos on the Power Platform, Power BI, data flows, anything basically that's part of my development. As I work, I find ideas for stuff, I write them down, and then I pass them on to you. LinkedIn, please feel free to add me. I try to answer as many questions as I have, given permitting time, of course. If you ask me a pretty simple question on is something available in Power BI, I'll probably get a quick response back to you. If you email me 3 pages of a problem, less likely, and I might just encourage like, consulting hours or something like that. But simple questions, I am very much encouraging people to ask and reach out for that. Getting larger link here. There we go. So if that one was too small, that is the main link that just takes me to my company's page. And the last thing that I want to mention, though, is one thing that I've been doing now in the last 6 months is for anybody that comes to my talk, I want to kind of give a way of thank you back. So I have a raffle. The one thing that I ask is this will take you to a sign-up form for my blog. If you are already signed up, it still enters you. But the raffle will be for 1 hour of consulting. So if your name is picked, essentially from the drawing, it will flag you as being an attendee of this event. You will get an email from me, and next time I have available time, I'll set up an hour, and you can pick my brain on anything from Power BI to reporting to data modeling, and I'll help you out with just anything you're curious about. But other than that, we're really good on time, about 4 minutes to the end. Is there any other questions that I can answer?
Yeah, so I was wondering about, you talked a little bit about accessibility. What do you do for, visually impaired people? The other question I had about responsiveness. Do you make this a responsive card, or is it just like a single embed, or how do you approach those two problems?
Yeah, so a good question. I think I'll just summarize and paraphrase to kind of a broader, how do I approach accessibility in Power BI via a lot of avenues? And Microsoft does provide a lot of ways to do that. Recently, one of, I think, the biggest things is there's the selection pane, which determines view order and what's on top. Separately to that, there is the, I forget the exact term, but it's the tab pane, where people are doing the Alt-tab to cycle through stuff. You can do a custom order for that to actually control the order that it tabs through. Each visual can also have other descriptions that go into there, so like they can have like other things for the text readers available in that. And then nowadays, because almost every color available in Power BI that's visible, they're moving to the point where all of it will be able to be changed with field values from DAX. So I've actually set up a couple of reports where I created a harvester slicer, the toggle on the left side of the screen, and if you can basically turn color accessibility on and off, and that will change everything in the report. The titles, the greens and the reds, all of those will immediately switch. It takes a bit to set up because you have to do it per visual and write all the measures, but you can now basically have a switch in the file that for a file servicing 300 people, you can turn color accessibility on and off very easily, which before you kind of had to build like 2 report pages, one with one and one with the other. Were there any others?
Yeah, the other question was, how do you handle
responsiveness in the, because that's a broad question, so let me drill in a bit.
If you were to take that scorecard and display it on a web page and then like smash it together for like a mobile device, do you handle that? Do you just say, no, you're just going to get this thing and it's just going to shrink?
That one is, I would say, is exclusively just like that one would be used on desktop. Like mobile does have the option where you can pin and unpin visuals and resize them and like make a kind of a mobile version. But with something that's just a giant one-page visual, you're not going to like want a vertical tiny matrix table there. And my actually technique for that is if I'm trying to, at a minimum, force them to use portrait mode, I think that's right. I feel like I'm brain farting. Whatever, I'm going to call it landscape. Landscape, thank you. Landscape mode, I will hide every visual except for a text box that says rotate your phone to access the report. And like that actually like completely empty except for a friendly text box. And I take that text box, I shrink it down, and I hide it behind a visual because it has to be visible to be able to attach it to that section. And it's, it's just a friendly reminder, yep, rotate your phone, you'll have the report. Because I honestly don't really like the vertical mode that much. So that's my way of encouraging adoption of certain uses for mobile. I will broaden it out though. Any other questions? We're exactly on time. I generally hang out for 15, 20 minutes outside as well if anybody wants to talk to me offline. But I want to thank all of you for coming. I really appreciate you giving me that time, so thank you.